What's going down, D-Gens? Guys, finally sort of get back on track. Not where we want to be, but at least coming out to like an even week. So we come out to 1-1. For last week, a couple of things I want to go over today is obviously the performance from last week, what happened there, kind of a recap of those games. Also, though, just going over the algorithm, where we're at, where the numbers are at, how accurate were we with this algorithm from last week, and then move into, of course, next week. And I have really 2 to 3 picks, depending on what we're looking at. Trying to stick with just 2, but I'll give you the third one just in case. So, as far as last week's picks, what happened, or what do we go with? So, first one was the Jaguars. That was really the best bet. It was Jaguars -7. Algorithm had it, as a pretty solid play. Unfortunately, didn't work out. If you got a chance to watch that game at all, I couldn't even start to tell you how bad the Jaguars were. It was just mistake after mistake. Trevor Lawrence it seemed like he was pressing that entire game, and I don't know why, but he just could not sustain a drive. They didn't score any offensive touchdowns, score any touchdowns at all. The Texans were playing, solid defense, and they're solid, I guess. They're okay defensively, the Texans, that is. But the Jaguars just could not get a damn thing done. They were driving the ball just fine. They had a ton of yardage. They were, doing great. They'd move the ball up and down, and they get to the red zone, and it was like they forgot how to play. They didn't know what calls to make, where they were going with the ball. Travis Etienne, I called it as far as just like I thought he was going to have a good game, and he did. Fantasy wise, I think he had like at least 11 points in standard and something like 15 in PPR, which was not, it's not like world shattering, but coming from 4 or 5 points, which was his typical output, pretty big, pretty significant. And if you go back and watch that game, he seems to be taking over more and more of that backfield. I don't think he's ever going to be like the true bell cow unless James Robinson gets hurt. And even at that, I think they're still going to bring somebody else in just because of his size. I don't think any coach in the NFL is going to look at Travis Etienne and say, yup, that's a dude we need to give 25 carries to. But he doesn't need 20, 25 carries. He's so explosive that with like 10 to 15 carries, he can bust some long runs. I don't have his numbers in front of me exactly, but I think it was like 70 yards on something like 10 or 11 runs, and at least 2 of those runs were just huge. I think he had 2 runs like back-to-back when he first got in the game. One was like 20 yards, and another one was like 25 yards or 30 yards, something like that. But he just hit huge plays, and he could have gotten in the end zone had they really given him a shot. But again, the team just didn't score at all. Just one last note, or 2 things, I guess, on this one. The play and the drive that perfectly sums up what the Jaguars did is towards the end of the game. I want to say it's the beginning of the fourth quarter, middle of the fourth quarter. Jaguars are driving the ball. They have a couple good runs, couple good passes. Travis Etienne's getting involved. They're moving the ball down. They get down to like the 12-yard line or something like that. It's 2nd and 1. Trevor Lawrence takes a snap. He's looking for someone to get open. He's running, and it looks like he's going to try to run to get the first down. It's 2nd and 1. The defender is probably 5-6 yards away. They're closing, but he could have gotten the first down. Trevor Lawrence is rolling out to his right, and it's like, okay, just take the first down and let's keep the ball moving. Nope. He flings it into the end zone, into a crowded end zone where there is probably 3 or 4 defenders in the area for like 1 or 2 Jags, and of course it's an interception. So it's a long sustained drive that ends up in 0 points because of a bad decision, and it could not have been any worse of a decision than that. I think most rookies would probably know better than to throw that ball, but like I said, it seemed like he was just pressing that entire game, trying to make something out of nothing, and it just wasn't there. A lot of his passes were just sailing on him, and really the only person who was out there catching anything for him was Marvin Jones besides Travis Etienne. So that's kind of a sum up of this is the Jaguars' day. Take that one play and just run that thing over and over and over again. As far as the Texans, like I said, their defense was solid. They really couldn't do shit on the on the ground either, or just offensively either. It wasn't until the fourth quarter when they finally started to drive, and really didn't even start because of them. They were not doing anything. They were going backwards. It was like 3rd and 20, and just terrible decision by the Jaguars. I can't remember the guy's name. One of the defensive tackles. The play was called dead. I want to say it was like offside or something like that. And he decided to still wrap up the quarterback and throw him down. And Davis Mills gets flinged like a rag doll. And they call roughing the passer. It's like a 15-yard penalty plus the first down automatically. And that exact play is what would eventually lead them into scoring. So they went from 3rd and 20, where they're most likely going to punt the ball away on the next play, to scoring a touchdown and taking the lead. So just it took a whole lot of events for that game to happen the way it did. Like events that probably wouldn't happen again if those teams play again, and they do play again. So I'll probably look to take the Jaguars again in their second matchup. But again, just goes to prove in those divisional matchups, in that first one at least, we tend to see lower scoring games, and this one was 13-6. So it doesn't get much lower than that. And that's kind of a little foreboding as far as foreshadowing, as far as what plays are going to come up for this week. But anyways, besides that, that was the first play. The second play was the Browns +3, and that one is the one we did win on, and just kind of went according to plan. Neither team could stop the other one. The game was mainly all offense. There was a couple of drives that stalled out for both teams, but for the most part, they were doing whatever the hell they wanted to. The ground game for both teams was just amazing, and you can tell it was amazing because in a game that ends 30-28, both of the quarterbacks had less than 20 fantasy points. Chubb was just tearing everybody up on the ground, and on the flip side, Eckler was doing his thing too. So it was great to watch, as far as just watching these guys get loose and do what they do. They just couldn't stop each other. So at the end of the game, the Browns actually had a chance to outright win that game. Chargers go for it on 4th and 1 with about 2 minutes left in the clock, and of course, they don't get it. And the Browns get the ball on like the 45-yard line. They drive a little bit closer. I think they get all the way to like maybe the 35 or 38 or something like that. And then they try the field goal, and it's wide right, so they miss. But like I said, we had the +3. It went pretty much the way we thought it was going to, where the Chargers were giving up everything on the ground. We get the win in that one. So not really too much to say about that one. We tend to learn a lot more from the losses than we do from the wins. So anyways, that's the recap for last week. As far as accuracy, how good were we with the algorithm? Last week we had 18 games that were within one standard deviation. Really didn't have any like weather issues last week, so kind of took that out of it. But that being said, again, 18 teams out of 32, so still more than half. A little bit less than the week before, so obviously we want to do better than that moving forward. Some of this was very matchup dependent, and some of these were just straight out like surprises. So if you're looking at the screen right now, you're looking at the bottom half of the league here and kind of how we did. So like the Chiefs, very accurate. Same thing with the Chargers. The Rams and the Raiders both pretty far off, as in more than one standard deviation. The Rams going up against the Cowboys, obviously, so that wasn't too big of a surprise. The Raiders going up against the Chiefs, it's not surprising that they needed to score more than what we would expect them to score. So again, two teams that were a couple points above the standard deviation, but we can kind of logically look at those games and say, yeah, we would somewhat expect that. The Dolphins 13 points under. Obviously, that was a big difference because there's no Teddy Bridgewater. Vikings pretty close. There were 6 points. The Patriots and the Saints. So the Patriots, that one was just crazy. Yes, they went well over. They played the Lions, who have no defense. And the Patriots, they only scored one offensive touchdown. So if you didn't watch that game, there's one offensive touchdown, which is a pass to Jacoby Myers. The rest of that game was really nothing but field goals. They had 5 field goals, 1 touchdown, and then 1 defensive touchdown. So that being said, the original assessment of about 10 points for the Patriots wasn't really far off. If you take out that 1 defensive touchdown, you're not too far off. It makes that 20-point difference look a lot closer. And aside from that, those 5 field goals I could see that being an issue moving forward. Ramondre Stevenson may be able to get in the end zone, but other than that, with Bailey Zappi, they're going to have some hard times trying to actually convert for touchdowns. The Saints, almost the exact opposite, went up against the Seahawks, and that game was obviously just a high-scoring game, so it makes sense that they'd go well over their expected points. What we didn't expect, though, is, of course, Taysom Hill to go nuts. Now, we'll say that particular outcome and just the stats they put up from last week make this team look a lot better, so they have kind of jumped up in what we're expecting to see from them moving forward, but I don't know how reliable that is, because last week against the Seahawks, again, Seahawks have one of the worst defenses in the NFL, so I don't know how consistent that's going to be. But anyways, that's just kind of a little bit of a rundown. I'm not going to go through every team. It'll just take too long. We'll be here for, until damn Sunday. Really, the only other one that I wanted to look at is, well, that's really about it. The Lions, obviously, they scored 0, so they're 17 points away from their expected total. That being said, they had all sorts of issues there. They missed passes. Jared Goff threw a pick. I think they threw a pick in the end zone as well. Just couldn't get anything going. Their run game was actually looking okay, better than expected against the Patriots defense, but they just kept shooting themselves in the foot, ended up coming away with 0 several times. But a lot of these are pretty close. I think and the Chiefs, actually, this shows 33, but I updated the score here. So the Chiefs, again, pretty close as far as what we expected them to be. So anyways, 18 scores that were pretty close, and the ones that were not close, more than like 2 deviations, we can at least somewhat kind of rationalize those away, and just kind of moving forward, we want to keep that in mind as far as, obviously, we see what the expected points is, and then we're going to kind of put that into play with the matchup. So as far as this week's picks, the first ones that I saw that stood out to me is the Jaguars-Colts game. Expected points here, I'm going to round this to 24, kind of more of an expected football total. And then the Colts, of course, we take this up to 10 anytime that it's below 10. So that being said, we're expecting like a 24-10 kind of game, which is, so 2 things. One, gives us a lean to the Jaguars, a pretty heavy lean, because the Jaguars are 2-point underdogs right now. But also an even stronger lean to the under would be my bet, because I could see the Colts winning this one. I could see the Colts maybe making a stand or 2 and keeping the Jaguars out of the end zone maybe once or twice and making this a much closer game. But if that's the case, I don't see it, because I don't see it meaning that the Colts go out there and score 30 plus points. I see that more as it becomes a very dirty, dogfighty game that ends like a 14-17 kind of game. And if that's the case, either way, I want to be on the under with that one. So it's Jags and Colts, under 42. Just to get a little bit more into the numbers here. So the offensive DVOA for the Colts, if you didn't know this, the Colts per DVOA are the absolute worst team in the NFL right now. Now, some of that is because Jonathan Taylor was gone and or hurt, but still, it is just terrible how bad they've looked. Jaguars obviously much better, but still like middle of the pack, if anything. One thing that I do want to look at here is at this Colts run rate. So they are 37.41% run rate, but I will say that number is skewed a little bit because they've been down so much. So usually they start off relatively conservative. They want to at least run kind of at a 50-50 pace if they can, while they can. But on the defensive side of the ball, the Jaguars are at a negative 14 DVOA, which is good. You want to be negative. Now the Colts are also negative 28. So both of these teams aren't super heavy towards the run, but they do want to get it involved and keep it as much as they can. And I do think that that's could lean to a faster paced game because the clock is going to keep ticking. and a lower scoring game, because this game should not really get out of hand at any point until maybe later in the fourth quarter. I do see this game again being something like a 10-17, 10-24 kind of game. 24 again being the expected points, but I could see this one going down in the deviation. So meaning it's more of like a 10-17 kind of game. So that's at least the rushing part of it. Even on the passing side here, we do see that the Colts pass rate is a little bit higher, but again, the Jaguars still have a negative passing DVOA, so that's for defense. Again, a good thing for the defensive side of the ball. We want them to be as low as possible. So negative 11, pretty damn good. But aside from that, the Colts have a negative 30 offensive pass DVOA rating, which is just like almost unheard of. There's very few teams that go that far down when they're passing the ball. So it just seems like a bad matchup for these guys. I can see the Jaguars really putting a lot of pressure on Matt Ryan and not letting him get a whole lot done through the air. On the opposite side, Trevor Lawrence may have somewhat of a bounce back here in that his pass DVOA as far as the team offensively it's 25, so it's relatively robust as far as just offenses go. Defensively, the Colts have not been able to stop the pass very well, and the Jaguars tend to keep it a little bit of a balanced approach. So I could see them, having some success through the air, but again, just not a whole lot of offense from either one of these teams. Now, the EPA expected points added per play is at about 1.2 for the Jaguars, and actually almost negative 15 for the Colts. So again, even when they get positive plays, it's a pretty pathetic positive play for both of these teams right now, and both of the defenses, especially the Jaguars, seem to be kind of up to the task of keeping these guys in check, keeping them relatively low scoring. Their success rate, both of them are around the 40s, which 45 from the Jaguars is not terrible, but 40 in the Colts is getting there. Usually once you dip below 40s when you start to kind of see some of the red pop up. Not a good thing. Blitz rates, neither of these teams are really blitzing too heavily. They both do give up some sacks. The Jaguars actually give up a few more sacks, and I think that's more Trevor Lawrence holding the ball, kind of what I was talking about with this last game. Holding the ball, trying to make something happen. Maybe that thing isn't really there. But defensively, the Colts aren't really getting many sacks either. They're getting sacks about 5% of the time, where the Jaguars are getting sacks about 6% of the time. So let's say we expect Matt Ryan to drop back, but let's say 30 times. Since the Colts are giving up about a 7% sack rate and the Jaguars are getting home about 6.5% of the time, let's call it 2 sacks that we're expecting there. So that doesn't seem like a whole lot, but keep in mind that when a team takes a sack, the odds of scoring at all drop drastically. The odds of even scoring go down to something like 35 to 40%, and the odds of scoring a touchdown go down to about 20%. So just even if it's just 1 or 2 times that these guys can get back there and sack Matt Ryan, just know that especially if it's on a drive where they're maybe moving the ball and they're having some success, and that's only going to come a few times throughout this game, that's just going to keep the point total even lower. Both of these QBs in a pretty low standing for the QBR. Trevor Lawrence, again, a little bit better just in the fact that he's at a .52. Not terrible, kind of middle of the pack, but just not great either. Now, to top all of this off, we have to kind of look at this through the lens of strength of schedule. So the Colts have played a relatively tough schedule, about the 10th toughest schedule in the NFL, where the Jaguars have played about the 4th or 5th easiest schedule so far. So even though the Jaguars' numbers may look a little bit better, keep in mind their testing has not been as hard. So both these teams, again, look to come in here with kind of a slower pace in mind, probably a lower scoring game. Because it's such a low scoring game, either team could win. This could be just kind of like a who makes the mistake first kind of thing, just like we saw last week with the Colts and the Texans. The Jaguars and the Texans. So I'm not really going to touch the side too much, but the total under the 42 is something that's really sticking out to me. That's it for the first pick. The second one is going to be the Saints and the Bengals. Really the same thing here. So it's going to be Saints and Bengals under 43. One thing that I did want to go over is that I do track like your differentials and totals. So every single week, come in here, we plug in all the scores, see what the differential was for every game, so we know kind of more or less what the winning margin is and then what the totals are. And that's also how we track the key numbers. So if you're interested in key numbers at all right now, 3 is of course still the biggest key number. It does come up, or it has come up 19% of the time. So out of the 80 games we've played, 15 of them have been decided by 3 points exactly. So that's huge. So if you are looking for a side play, you want to make sure you get that 3, especially if you're doing a teaser. You want to make sure you get through that 3. But aside from that, I can also look at the totals. So just doing a quick mode of the totals and finding what's the most common. 43 is actually the most common number, meaning that's the biggest key number for this particular year. Now, 43 is and has been key number in the past, or at least a number that we like to look at with totals, and that's one of the reasons I'm looking at this total in particular. It had bumped up to 44 for just a couple of hours earlier today, and then it got bought back down to 43. So I'm hoping it doesn't drop any lower by the time you see this, but very, very similar rationale with the Bengals and the Saints. The Bengals, actually, one thing that I want to note with them is that their defense in the second half of games is tremendous. Their defensive adjustments at halftime come out and just shut down teams. The Ravens have had decent success with them last week. They had a field goal in the third quarter and a touchdown in the fourth quarter, and that's essentially the most that they've given up really since the Super Bowl, and even prior to that, going back into last year's playoffs. The most that they gave up in the third quarter has been 3 points, and I think they've only done that 2 or 3 times. And then in the fourth quarter, they may give up a touchdown, they may not, but usually it is no more than 10 points in that second half. The Bengals, on the flip side of that, are also kind of a slow playing offense in that they like to run the ball. They like to put their running backs just up against that defensive line over and over and over again. They're running at a 40% rate. Very similar to what I was just saying with the Jaguars. And the Colts, that is, they're going to run until they can't. They want to keep it kind of close to 50-50. And again, a lot of these numbers get skewed because at some point you have to throw the ball, especially when you're having a losing record. You're most likely down in most games. You have to start throwing the ball. But their rush DVOA is amazing at a -20. Sort of similar to what the Saints have, because if we look at the Saints team, we are going to see, one second. So the Saints team here is running about 36% of the time, so they are throwing a little bit more, but their rush DVOA is at a -13. So they're keeping teams in check as well. Now, when they do run, they're having a negative outcome. Now, they're passing pretty frequently with about a 64% pass rate. As far as the Bengals are concerned, the Bengals do have a pretty decent secondary. They're actually at a -12 DVOA per pass rate. So they are able to keep that pass rate in check. If you're looking at the Saints and you're looking at last week's game with the Seahawks, just like I was saying earlier, that game was very high scoring, predominantly because the Seahawks could not stop anything. The Saints had run after run after run. They were just explosive runs. Alvin Kamara had a little screen pass that went for something like 45, 50 yards. Taysom Hill he had multiple touchdowns and he threw for a touchdown, but one of his touchdown runs was a 30, 40 yard run, just a sweep. And the Seahawks couldn't do anything to stop it. The Bengals have a much better defense in that. They like to play it slower. They like to play a 3-high zone where they just kind of keep everything in front of them. And you can run on them somewhat, but it's going to be slow going. You're going to take a lot of clock if you're just going run after run after run. Now, last week we saw Andy Dalton make a couple of passes a little bit further down the field. Maybe Michael Thomas comes back this week. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe Olave is okay this week. Maybe he's not. But either way, I don't think you're going to see a lot of explosive plays from the Saints offense, mainly because of the defense that the Bengals play and just kind of their scheme and wanting to keep everything in front of them, wanting to keep it very slow. And then when the Bengals get the ball, they're still going to run very slow. They're going to just kind of do their thing. when you watch the Bengals, you see a lot of screen passes, a lot of left and right, a lot of horizontal stuff. Even when they run the ball, it's never really like a straight right off the center kind of thing. It's let's go left, let's go right, let's sweep, let's maybe go reverse. It's a very slow thing going left and right, and because of this, you kind of partner that with the Bengals having a great second half as far as defense, it leads to a lot of low-scoring games. Last thing I'll say on this is that the Saints this past week had 2 touchdowns in the first half. Those are the first touchdowns they've scored in the first half this season. They've been very, very slow starting as far as their first half of games. So if we have a team that has a slow first half and they're playing against a team that has an amazing defense adjustment in the second half, I could see the Saints really struggling in this game. I could see this being like a 10 to 14 point game for the Saints. Now, I have them predicted at 21, and again, keep in mind that's because of last week's success, kind of bumped them up a little bit. Realistically, I could see them being 2 deviations below that, which would, let's say that's at 10 points. So I could see this being like a 10 to 17 game where the Bengals win, and it ends up being like at a 27 point total. So under 43 is my pick here. Even if the Saints find a way to get their offense running and they meet their expected points, that's still only 38 points. And again, if that's the case, let's say the Bengals go over their expected total, they get a whole touchdown over, and it's 24-21, 45. That's obviously where you would lose at that point, but that's asking for both teams to hit the very, very top peak performance that we can expect from them, and I think that outcome is very unlikely. That's like a 5% outcome. So those are the 2 plays that we have for this week. I do have one more, and I'm not going to go too far on this one, but I'll just keep it simple. It's the Bucs -8 at the Steelers. There's been a lot of talk this week about Mike Tomlin kind of losing that team as far as the Steelers are concerned. Even the veterans are coming out saying they're not really respecting him right now. Quarterback and Kenny Pickett looks okay, but he's a rookie. He's not really running everything. He's not putting up a lot of points. Obviously, they only had 3 points last week. And they did go up against a good defense in the Bills, but the team just looked really slow. Najee Harris isn't really hitting the holes right. The offensive line is terrible. Now, the Bucs, on the flip side of that, also have some issues in that if you look at their depth chart right now, like half the team is questionable. Now, most of them are going to suit up and play, but it's never good to see that. Secondly, obviously, you have some personal issues. Todd Bowles and Tom Brady both going through something. Tom Brady obviously going through his divorce. Who knows what Todd Bowles is up to. Now, that's a little scary, just in the fact that they're kind of maybe distracted. But if you've seen anything from these top competitors in athletics, regardless of sport, if something is not going right in their personal lives, usually the field, the court, the whatever is the place that they like to kind of be in control. They like to take charge in that moment, and they will go out there and kick whoever's ass just because that's their spot, that's their comfort zone. My number one example of that is Kobe Bryant. When he had like the rape allegations and stuff, he went out there and balled out, just went nuts. And I think, yeah, it's not rape or anything, but I do think that Tom Brady's going to put up some performances here as he's going through this stuff, and as football is maybe his like release valve. That all being said, again, I'm just going to keep it simple. I'm going to tell you that I think the Buccaneers smoked the Steelers. I don't think the Steelers are going to have any offense this week, and I think they're really going to struggle with that Buccaneers defense. The expected totals here, Buccaneers 26, let's round it and say 27. Again, just kind of more of an NFL score. And the Steelers at 10. So I'm expecting like a 27-10 kind of game. And that's sounds pretty realistic. So 17-point win with 8-point spread. I doubt that this thing gets any lower. So if you're with me on this pick, I'd grab it sooner than later because I could see us getting down to like a -10 by the time we actually get to kickoff. But Buccaneers -8, that's the third pick. If you're looking for any other details on that one or you want some information on it, put it in the comments, whatever you need. I'll give you the stats, the spreadsheet, whatever. That all being said, guys, that's it for today. Those are the 3 picks. Hopefully we can get this thing on track with finally having a winning week. But thanks again. Thank you guys for the support. Y'all have a great weekend. Hopefully everyone's so money out there.